tonight's book festival to give me the opportunity to talk about something that I am very passionate about, which is flash writing, both creative fiction as well as creative non-fiction. And very specifically to talk about this book, which is called In Other Stories. It has 25 authors in it, published by Caravan Press, and today I have invited 4 of those authors to come and share a little bit about their writing process, what is Flash all about, and to read to you a little bit because what is a book ever without hearing somebody read to you. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the collection. It's been called Compelling, Diverse, Original, Entertaining. It's been compared to the Flowers in Bouquet, that you can actually savor each story on its own scent, its own colour, but then when they're put together, it is a very beautiful bouquet. I gave my 84-year-old mother a copy of this book over Christmas, and I think she read it about 3 times. Because she kept going, oh, no, I want to read that story again. And I remembered that, oh, let me go and read that again. And she enjoyed it so much. So it's for all age groups. And then just as an aside, we are going to be publishing another Flash anthology this year, and I'm running a number of workshops around this. One is directly after this panel here at the Flash Book Festival, and one for events is for free. So joining me today, as I said, are 4 writers on the anthology. Next to me is Sally Cranswick, who is a writer, story coach. She's also running a writing workshop here today. And her short story collection, Woman Out of Water, was shortlisted for the Nadine Gordon Short Story Award, and her novel, Of All Things We Need Hope, is due for release this year. Of course, the publisher is due for release this year, so that's really great. Sitting next to her is Chantal. Chantal Stewart is a doctor, author, and a poet. Her debut novel, The Veil of May, was a winner in the NIHSS Award for Best Novel and recently won an award for the Best Novel at UCT. And Chantal is also facilitating another panel here today, so there's so many fantastic writers here. And then sitting next to Chantal is Jennings. Jennings' novel, An Island, was longlisted for the Booker Prize. She co-founded the Island Prize for unpublished African authors. So if you do have a manuscript for a novel, I think the Island Prize is open.
Yes, until the 16th of February.
So have a look out for that. And her most recent novel, was published last year, and I think is still writing. There are new things coming out. And then sitting next to Jennings is Symons, who has published poetry and prose, including 5 poetry collections. His 5th collection, The Algebra of Insignificance, was published last year, and he has a new short story collection coming out this year. And I believe he's working on other things, which I won't talk about. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me today, and thank you to the audience as well. So I'm going to ask my first question. For you, how would you describe Flash? What makes Flash writing Flash as compared to all of the other genres? Anybody would like to start?
Okay, can everyone hear me? For me, Flash is not too distant a walk from prose poetry, which I have written a fair amount of, and I see obvious and pretty distinct overlaps between the two. But I think in terms of distinguishing what Flash fiction is I see it as a narrative fraction of sorts that can perhaps develop into something longer, into a short story, and perhaps in some cases even a novel. So for me, I would say Flash fiction really is a spark to greater things.
For me, I find that because I write normally novels, or last year I was experimenting more with writing short stories, and I find that flash fiction it's a real discipline. It's like writing a haiku or a sonnet or something that has a strict form or limit, where you have to try and convey something full of emotion, character, story to your reader, but you only have, in this case, 500 words. And it was very challenging for me. At first I sat down and I wrote it and I thought, oh, this is easy. Then I looked at my word count and I had 700 and something words. And then to try and etch away at it to get something decent that conveys everything you want to convey, it's a very, very good exercise, and also very pleasant, as you said, for your mother, for a reader, that they can read it quickly. You don't have to commit to weeks and weeks and weeks. You don't need to invest in a bookmark. You can just read it and then come back and enjoy it again.
So for me, Kerry said that flash is both fiction and non-fiction. I write fiction, so I'll speak about flash fiction. For me, it's obviously the short length is the main characteristic, but it's about telling a story. It's a moment in time, so it's like a snapshot, and in that snapshot, you have to tell an entire story. And what's different for me from flash and a short story is that because it's so short, a lot is left to people's imagination. You can't spell it out, a lot is hinted at. And I think that condensed version with a lot left to the imagination brings a certain intensity to it, which other prose writing doesn't. And so I agree with Stephen that it's more like a poem. It's a snapshot, a moment in time with an intensity and often a twist.
So yes to everything he says. And I don't know if you remember those Magic Eye pictures from the 80s, you gazed at all those images and then one image pops up at you. So for me, this kind of idea of flash fiction is, I think some people would say, it's almost like you've got a novel and then the Magic Eye pops up at you and you see the essence of it. So for me, I think that this little tiny flash is almost like the essence of a longer story. So I enjoy it for that. I work with a lot of prompts, and I work with 10-minute prompts. So you tend to get 500 words in those 10 minutes. And you can actually tell that whole feeling of the story in those 10 minutes. So for me, it's the feeling. I like to leave people with a feeling, and that's what that flash piece is.
Great, thank you. For me, listening to what everybody said, there's just a few things that I want to pick up on. One are the words that Carl used around etching away. And then very often when you write in flash, you're discarding things, but etching away is a really lovely image because you're trying to get to that essence that Sally's talking about, and you're trying to get to that feeling. And one of the things about writing flash is that you can encompass so many things in it. You can write a postcard that can be a piece of flash. You can write a whole lot of things. You can use a certain structure, like minutes in an hour. And these are a lot of the things that I explore in my workshops. Sorry, that wasn't a pun for the workshops. So I'm really interested in asking these writers, because you've heard from them, they write long things, they write novels, they write short stories. Yes, there's quite a few of them who write poetry. So I'm really interested in understanding their writing process, but also very specifically, why write flash? How do you actually know whether something is going to be a short story, or it's going to be a novel, or it's going to be a piece of flash, or even a poem for those of you who write poetry? Something else you want to start?
I think for me, flash comes out of writing from prompts. So I write a lot in workshops, and the kind of workshops we do are free writing from prompts. And the story in the book came from one of those prompts. So the prompts are often quite short. You start with something and you've got 10, 15, 20 minutes. And sometimes those become longer stories, but often, because of the time, they're contained as they are. So for me, Flash, and once again, a bit like a poem, is a separate thing. It's not something that would go on necessarily to become a longer piece. It is contained in itself. And you know, it's a bit like people have said, it's easy, it's quick and easy to read. It's a bit like having a nice cup of tea. You can sip on it and you can finish it in the time that it takes to make a cup of tea.
I really like that. Yeah, from other writers. How do you know this is a piece of flash or this writing process? You want to speak to that?
I think in terms of is it flash or isn't it flash, it's quite difficult for me being a poet because, as I mentioned earlier, the obvious overlaps with particularly prose poetry. So I tend to approach writing in a fairly disciplined manner, and I like to know what framework I'm working within. So if, for example, I know this is going to be a piece of flash fiction, I'll approach it in that particular mindset. And likewise, whether it's a short story or poetry. But again, the boundaries tend to blur for me when I'm working like that. And I haven't, to be frank, I haven't worked exclusively and at any length as a flash fiction writer, but certainly as a prose poetry writer. So for me, I find that boundary to be constantly in a state of flux, and it tends to blur. And the way I work my way around that is to know that this is flash, this is poetry, short story, etc. Yeah, that would be, I guess, my approach.
Great, thanks.
May I respond to that's very interesting because I was trying to come up with an answer that to the question that sounds I don't know, intelligent, but I don't have an intelligent answer because I'm the opposite of you. I'm not disciplined at all. I will just sit down and I'll write, and whatever comes out is what it is. I'm not ever sure what it is until it's done. And although what was different in this instance is that I was doing it knowing that it was to a prompt because, or that it was going to be flash, because I thought, oh, let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can write something for this anthology. And then it happened, but otherwise, I suppose it's as much a surprise to me as to anyone what's going to come out of my writing.
Great, two very different approaches.
Means it's my turn to say something intelligent. And I think, so the question is, what is flash to me? How do I approach it?
Yes, and how does it differ from your other writing? Your short stories, novel.
So I do this morning writing. I wake up and I write, and I often find with a piece of flash, it's going to come to me first thing in that moment between the effort, you know, when you sort of wake up. And so you might have had something that happened the day before, and then again it's capturing that essence and that feeling of it. So because I do a lot of short work, often when I think I'm writing, it's not a conscious thing that I'm going to write a piece of flash, but I know it's going to, if that makes sense, I know it's going to be a flash. I know that's not going to be a big story, but then I don't contain it with word count. So I think this is a small thing that I write it. And often when you quickly write it like that, it has its own energy. And I find that, yes, you must look at every single word, but obviously the more you write, the more you get used to it. So I find it comes straight like that. It's almost like a blueprint.
Yes.
It's sort of a feeling, and I wake up with that feeling from something that happened, and then boom, quickly do it, and it's done.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely, and I think there have been some lovely things here. from these writers for other writers in the audience about writing flash and writing in general. So thank you very much for sharing your stories. What I'm interested in hearing are about your stories in the psychology, and as I said, I will give each of the writers to read something. I'm interested in hearing what the title of your story is, what the inspiration is for your story.
Yes, my story is called Panties, and the inspiration was not actually panties, but I was a writer in residence at Stellenbosch University, working in a department that deals with history and particularly the economic history of the Cape. And so my job was to do research, but instead of writing boring academic papers, although I did write a few, was to write responses in a creative form, which can disseminate knowledge about history, about the Cape to a wider audience. And so I had been reading about the slaves and how they used to go and really strain themselves carrying this heavy washing up to the river to wash it, and the whole process of washing it, which was a whole day laborious process. And then I was thinking about what is the impact of individuals, of our slave history on individuals today. And my Oma, for example, she had a very limited number of panties, and she would wash one panty every night after she'd worn it during the day, and then dry overnight, and then she'd put it on the next day. And that for her was the routine that she'd grown up and learned from her mother, or however it was. And so I was really inspired by the impact of slavery on ourselves and the normal, intimate, but simple aspects of daily life.
Great, thank you. Yeah, when I'll talk more about the selection process in the book, but when I read that story, I thought immediately, this is a story that has to be in here. So thank you very much for writing it. Chantal?
So my story is called The Rain, and the title doesn't really tell you what the story is about, but it is about a young girl lying in a room on her own, and there's a sense of fear. And it's really about gender-based violence. And it is rather deep. My work at the hospital was such that we saw a lot of women who had been subject to abuse, and particularly domestic violence. And I didn't write, I wrote the story in a workshop. I didn't write it particularly for the psychology, but at the time that I was writing it, I had also recently read a book about human trafficking, about girls who were trafficked across countries. And so that was the inspiration for the story, which is really about a young girl, and it's only hinted at, but there's obviously a sense of fear, and the question is, why is she there on her own? Why is she afraid?
I'm glad you mentioned that it's only hinted at. I think that's a very strong part of the story. And as somebody mentioned, a lot of the thing about Flash is that you don't have to tell the whole story. That there are lots of that you can leave out. But because of the way the story is written, you know what the story is about, you know what's behind it. Sally, you want to talk a little bit about your story?
Yes, so my story is called The Fear of Sharks Swimming Squad. No, The Fear of Sharks Swimming School. I was playing with the music squad. And so I'm a big thinker. I think as everybody here must be, the writers will thinkers, and I think about stories very conceptually. And then so whatever's kind of on my mind does tend to come out in my stories. And I think at this particular moment I was thinking about what it is to have people that we know or don't know, feel, can't feel, that walk alongside of us. And that comes in many forms. That can come spiritually, physically, partnership-wise, and it can come in the form of pillars that you believe in, be it religion or, whatever these things are. So I have been thinking a lot about that, what and who walks alongside us, and in combination that I'm a runner and I run in Silver Line Dam, and as you stand on the top of the mountain, you look down and there's this inky black water, and you can swim in it. And so these sort of images come together for me, I think that's without giving a spoiler alert.
Great, thank you. And Stewart, from you?
The title of my piece of flash fiction is The Fable of the Murder Boy. And I was inspired by a Neruda poem, which bears a similar title, The Fable of the Murder Boy, the Mermaid and the Drugs. And what I wanted to do with this particular piece was somehow weave the everyday, the quotidian, our everyday lives into a fairy tale, into a fable. And having grown up surfing the beaches of False Bay, I decided to somehow weave that local experience, that experience of living a quite normal everyday life into a fairy tale, into a fable. And over that, underwriting that, in fact I should say, rather, underwriting the story is this notion of loss and deep loss, and how the murder boy, and I don't want to spoil it a bit, how the murder boy, finding this murder boy, actually leads to a type of redemption and a type of acceptance and facilitates grieving. So it's really a modern day fairy tale, I think, or fable.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, fables are definitely another way of writing fiction. If you read fairy tales or any of those things, a lot of them have very short recounts. So you can hear from all of these stories that all of them are connected to water in some way. And I can tell you when I selected these four writers for the panel, it was for other reasons than the fact that the stories are connected to water. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to read a short section from each of their stories, starting with Sally.
The glasses change. Okay. The fear of sharks swimming school. They said it was a school for people who were afraid of sharks, so I joined them. I looked down from the cliff path, and they're all swimming around in a pod with dorsal fins strapped to their backs. They've got snorkels and are cruising, faces down, mimicking the very thing that they are terrified of. When I join them, no one stops to say hey. They just keep swimming, faces down, fins slicing the water. The water is so clear that I can see the bottom of the ocean. Am I the only one who can see the real shark under us? A black shadow navigating the deep. What sort of shark is it? Does it matter? It's big, with rubbery whiskers, like a catfish.
So this is from the rain, and it's towards the end of the story. Maybe one has to go outside to see what has happened. Out onto the stoop, into the starless night, with the lantern at the door swaying gently and shedding a hazy circle in the mist. Velvet hands have put it there to push away the darkness. But tonight the trees are cloaked in folds of rain, and the rays do not reach them. She tries to remember the rain soaking through her fluffy pink slippers as she stands on tiptoe on the step, looking out into darkness. She tries not to remember the faint stain of red next to the trees, and the suggestion of white, the colour of the dress her sister was wearing.
This is from Panties. Sometimes Layla tries to take the bucket of panties away from her grandmother, though there is no stopping her once she has begun. This is how she was raised. She takes pride in it, telling about her own great-grandmother who had been born into slavery at the Cape, where she worked as a washerwoman, going each morning to the stream that came down from Devil's Peak with baskets of other people's clothing. First placing the soiled garments in the flowing water, holding them down with stones to let them soak, then pounding them against a rock, the women strong, no weaklings for this kind of work, gossiping as the smell of wet dirt rises up around them, all the bits of fat and oil from their masters' and mistresses' meals, their fluids and excreta, the various creams and pomades for their hair and faces. Soap is rubbed in, and the garments are left to sit, perhaps with buchu or lavender sprinkled on them to make them smell fresh, while the women nap, wash their hair, talk with hope of better days. Then once more the soaking and beating, the final rinse, before leaving them to dry on warm rocks in the sun.
She placed the merboy at the water's edge. Phosphorescence leapt at his form. There was no thank you or backward glance as he pulled himself towards the first rank of white water and was gone. Later, she would convince herself it was the dark or the white water that thieved his farewell. The bay traps wads of fog, the residue of sea breeze, as it releases a white sun in a blinding sweep of amber. She has sat at the water's edge until dawn, thinking of the merboy, an aircraft aflame in a wheat field, and her son in the surf. Now she thinks of nothing. Everything is untethered, slight as a flock of gulls in flight, as the merboy descends between emerald sun shafts towards his kind, ever deeper, to those places where our shipwrecks of sadness rest. The siren of an ambulance announces a far-off disaster and then fades.
Thank you. There's something very special about having a writer read their story to you. I hope that has given you a wonderful appetite for these stories and the other stories that are in the book. I mentioned earlier on about selecting the stories for the anthology, and there were some that were immediate for me, like I talked about Jennings' story. I did receive all of the stories anonymously. That shows me, yes, it must go into a definite pile. And there were other stories that were perhaps not as well written, but I could see the gem of the story, I could see the gem of the writing in it. But I then worked with those writers to craft that story to be published. I think from a Flash point of view, and when the writers spoke about it earlier on, is there an emotional feeling in the story that's coming across very strongly? Is the writer not trying to over-explain things, just really writing what is of the essence in the story? And I suppose it's not an objective process. I think anybody who's put an anthology together of other writers, you are looking for things that speak to you. And as a writer myself, I'm interested in what other writers are writing, but also how well they write. But I'm not going to contradict myself, because as I mentioned, not all of the stories were that well written. And I think when you read the anthology and you read the stories in it, some of them are humorous, some of them are quite dark. And I think that's the power of Flash, is that it enables you to tackle a large number of topics. So what I want to do, just looking at the time, I do have one or two more questions, but I'd really like to open this up to the audience. You came to this panel for a reason, and I'd like to hear some of your questions. I was wondering if you might tell us what your story was. Oh, okay. So my story. Okay, well, that's a good one. So let's start with that. So my story is called It Happened Like This. And it is a story about a dog that is dying. So yes, it's tragic, and it's about a short car journey. And it was also written from a prompt very interestingly. And part of the prompt was to take a number of objects. Take a car, take a song, and take an animal in the street, and put them into a piece of flash. And the prompt was about being specific. So it's not just a street, it was Main Street. And it wasn't a car, it was a volunteer that Datsun could pay, which also happened to be the very first car that I owned. And the animal was a dog, as I mentioned, and the song was Rod Stewart singing the song Passion, which was very popular when I was 16. So that aged me a lot, but it enabled those high-level prompts enabled me to find the detail and to write the story. So thank you for that question. Okay.
I have a question. I think Sadie used the word energy, and I find that the short stories have this flash of energy, which is fascinating, all of them. And I'd like to know from all of you, how do you match plot and authentic energy, which is bubbles up? How do you match that?
I think each story, shall I go?
Yes.
I mean, it depends on the voice. Each story has a very distinct energy depending on the voice that you want to use for that story. And again, it comes into this magic eye thing. It goes with the theme, the plot, what you're saying. So I think voice is quite an interesting thing to look at with energy with that. So it might be quite staccato, and that gives it kind of a different sort of jagged energy. And mine was a bit more dreamlike, I think, in its quality, because it wasn't, it wouldn't really happen, and yet it was happening, and yet it wasn't magical reality, So, what did you think the voice of your story was? Did that work with the energy?
Yeah, mine was a very subdued voice. But I'm thinking about the plot. I think there's not a classical plot in a lot of Flash. Plot usually there's a kind of introduction and crescendo. Flash seems is for me more a moment rather than a progression of things happening. So it's more a description of a moment in time. So I think plot for me is not big in Flash. It's more about the energy. The energy can be quite subdued.
I'm terrible at answering these kinds of questions because about my own writing process, I honestly, there's no thinking. My mind is completely blank. If I try to think, it stays blank. And for me, that's why I still write by hand. It's all done on the page, and it comes out, and there's no. This is not me bragging. Oh, I don't think it just comes. Honestly, I've tried thinking. I still try. I try to think, but nothing. It doesn't work. And so I don't know. It just it happened. Maybe my hand is possessed by someone. I don't know.
And yeah, I agree with Cora in terms of voice. Frankly, I don't believe in voice. Voice happens, the story dictates the voice. One doesn't really pull this voice out of the ether. It tends to develop and grow and have its own particular accent or a dialect for that particular story. And out of that, I think the voice becomes apparent. So, yeah, all right.
Great, thanks for the question.
Yeah, do you think that publishers will be precious about kind of saying, I can't put, our genre labels important. If you're doing this, and probably of short stories, you're going to say, I can't put that one in, it's flash, like, we must go to flash and publish. Is there some instance where actually a kind of hybrid publication, which is going to be enthused about, won't readers quite fancy a bit of long, a bit of short, a bit of a poem, a bit of a picture? Where are we going really with publishing? will people have to depend on Caravan and you to sort of have an annual flash anthology, and then everybody puts away all their short story pens and their, all their other kinds of brains, and they go flash brain for once a year.
Yeah. I think because, when you look over, I'm going to just talk a little bit about overseas, because a lot of my exploration around flash writing has been with writers overseas. There's a lot of journals that only publish flash. There is an online journal that only publishes creative non-fiction flash. So there's a lot of specialization. And I think the specialization comes about to encourage people to write in that way. I don't know about general anthologies, and as I said, we definitely want to publish another one, because I'm very keen for writers to write in this form. Stephen talked about prose poems. It's another form that I'm also very passionate about. I teach at Rhodes, and I teach a seminar on prose poetry. From an anthology point of view, I don't know. But I think individual collections and individual ways of writing are changing. And so I think from your short story collection, you've got some flash pieces in there.
Yeah, that's true.
And then Stephen, your poetry has prose poems as well as normal line poems in it. So I get the sense that individual collections are shifting towards being more, we use the word hybrid, although I don't like it, to be more hybrid around those forms. I don't know about general things. I don't know. Should we ask Rita, should we mind answering that question? As a publisher, how do you feel about anthologies, so a collection of writers that would be a mixture of different forms? Would it work?
Just practically, I think it would only work for an individual writer. The moment you have 20 writers and you do not know what to expect, and there is no common something, as a reader, I look at the book like this and I think, what is this? It's basically a literary magazine in a sense.
Yes.
So it's not an anthology of because they are usually compiled around the genre, a theme, something that is in common. Like you mentioned earlier, that these could be like water stories, these could be water flashes.
Yes.
Like 20 of them.
Yes.
Sorry. No, partly I was being sort of cheeky, I suppose, in a sense. So if you're very inspirational and everybody there says, flash is the thing for me, in a few months' time everybody got 50. Where's the outlet going to be for flash writing?
It's not about an outlet, I think, it's about honing a craft. And flash is a brilliant way of honing a craft. If you can do this, you can just about do it. And I think it's much more difficult to run a flash than it's like with poetry. A budding writer, I would encourage more to try these shorter forms because it teaches you everything that you know for whatever it makes you to do.
And if you submit into journals and other places like that, they will definitely take
A huge market.
It is definitely a huge market. So we have got 1 or 2 minutes left. I do want to ask our final question because I think it's important for writers in the audience. And I'd really like to hear from the panel about any advice that they would like to give to writers in general, to aspiring writers. Anybody can start.
Anybody who knows me will know what my piece of advice is. Write every day. Every single day, and just no writing is wasted writing. You'll either just learn something by writing it or use it later, but write every day and make progress, not perfection. Don't worry about making a perfect story or a perfect sentence, just make the sentence, make the story.
I think you need to have a passion to write. It would be almost like compulsion. Someone came to me and said, I've had this interesting life and people tell me I must write my own works. But they weren't really, it was more people are telling me to do this. That's not going to work. You must want to do it. You must have to do it. innocently to do it. And then once you decide that you want to write, I think people have different ways of doing it. And I think Sally is right, and I admire people who are organized and have the discipline to get up and write for 2 hours every day. I can't do that, so I write sporadically. So I'll write for a week and I'll write maybe 8 hours a day for a week. It doesn't matter how you do it, the important thing is to just write. And don't worry about the grammar and all that sort of stuff and where it fits together. Just write what you are compelled to write, and you can fix it up there.
I agree with everything that's already been said, and I will then add I actually have 3 points, but they go together for what you need to do to work at being a writer, and they're very, very, very simple. It's taken me 42 years to really figure it out for myself, but to be a writer, you need to write. That doesn't mean you have to publish, you need to write, as Sally and Chantal were saying. And then 2, you need to read. You can't be a writer if you're not reading. And the 3rd thing, just to keep it to the R's, is to review. And what I mean by that is to analyze what you're reading and what you're writing to determine if you're reading a book that you've enjoyed, why did you enjoy it? What's good about it? If you read a book that made you fall asleep, why did you fall asleep? So that you are learning all the time and you're able to put that into your own writing to make your own writing better.
I couldn't agree more. But I believe be bold, be courageous, swim against the stream. Go to any bookstore, 90% of it is. I think that's really, really important to believe in yourself, but at the same time, for me, the most important thing is to read and read widely. Read from the Far East, read from the Middle East, read from Europe, America, South America, and yeah, it needs to be Africa. Read local, read international. Join a library, watch movies. That's my advice. And of course, draw on your own life, draw on your life experience. I think that's vitally important. I think authenticity of voice is often the process of having lived those particular experiences. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I think out of our lives comes really, really interesting stories, and that's where we should begin.
Can I add one more thing? You talk about being courageous, all of that is so important in terms of also don't think about how much money you're going to make, because the answer is zero. And I can't tell you how many young people, that's the first thing they want to know. How much money do you make? Easy, nothing.
It's worse.
Great. Thank you to the writers, thank you for sharing your wisdom, thank you to the audience for being here, thanks once again to the Cape Fed Sports Festival. If you haven't got a copy, it's definitely worth it. Not only these fantastic 4 writers, because they need it, and Karina has a story in it as well, and a lot of other writers, and our great Anne Stewart who wrote Bloomer. If you haven't read Bloomer, you must read it, and she has a collection here as well. So it is, yeah, if I say so myself, a really lovely thing. Yeah, my mother loves it. So thank you everybody. Thank you for being here.